Hey! Welcome back. So today's video we're actually sitting down. I missed sitting down actually. I used to do this a lot with the community, have a conversation. Let's get into it, okay? Yes. So the way this works is actually I'll be having a conversation with you specifically, and I'll be sharing my ideas on a particular topic. But before I do that, I will discuss your take, your opinions. So if you want to partake in the next episode of this, you can drop a DM to me, a direct message in Twitter, or you can basically... The first one today is actually very controversial one. So basically, Randy says, my advice would be to get back doing what you love in all forms of art, despite any fear of rejection or otherwise. And this one is very, very important because, by the way, he delves into a lot of details about his take on this particular subject. I will drop a link below to his Twitter and everyone's Twitter in here, as well as this particular tweet longer, because he really delves into a lot of details. There's quotes, there's research, and I really want to take a detour to another subject that links both of these subjects together, which is artists and writers specifically being obsessed with getting published and forgetting why they started writing. And I don't really know where this particular obsession comes from, but modern writers have noticed in this. I can't say much about all the generations. However, younger generations are obsessed with becoming famous. They are so obsessed with becoming famous. So a lot of people start writing basically for the fun of it. But after a while, it becomes an obsession, and people become so obsessed that they start writing for agents, for editors. They start writing for publishers. They start chasing trends. People will be literally perfectly fine bumping out a book every month in order to chase the trends as they are happening and to optimize for the Amazon algorithm. And this is something that I think is really, really awful and extremely toxic about the writing community as well as writers of this generation. I can't say about all the generations, right? But I can say a lot about modern generations, especially my generation. And we are obsessed with getting published. We are obsessed with the numbers. We are obsessed with how many likes we're getting. All of these things I've noticed a lot. And it really links nicely to, Randy's particular take on this subject, because you see, writers should not really worry about rejections. Writers should not worry about the numbers. And this is a really, really toxic mentality because it consumes you. I have actually been driven by this particular toxic theme. I will not exclude myself from my generation. I suffer from the same problems, where just about 2 years ago, I was really driven by the numbers. I was really driven, by how many retweets or how many likes or how many comments I got on a particular, tweet, or how many likes I got on my videos. Nowadays, I don't really, I try my best. I'm a human, but I try my best to not obsess over those things, right? And I would advise other writers to really not obsess over the numbers, right? And a topic that really links to this one about the craft, about writing, and what you should do as a person, and what how you should write, and how to healthily do that, is the concept of writing rules. Because writing rules are mostly guidelines. I hate it when writers behave with a smug mentality. That is BS. Because you cannot be behaving as if a writing rule or something that is famous, a writing advice that is famous, like write every day, is right for everyone. One of my actually, great friends who has been interacting with me for quite a long time, First Wells, actually says this beautifully in the tweet I sent out. They say, most rules are heavily flawed, poorly explained, or even outright wrong. He gives an example, right? Show, don't tell. And the reason why, actually, let's delve into more details, right? I don't just want to gloss over it, because I think, First Well's take is really beautiful. And I think there needs to be in-depth discussion about this, right? Show, don't tell. What does that mean? Okay, so in a book, you're writing it. When you are writing the book, you should not just show everything, because if you were to show everything, it would take you a lot longer to write the story. So you have to be efficient. You have to show and tell. Why? As I said, it's not just only for efficiency, it is also for reinforcing a concept, right? For instance, you show something, after you show it, you can actually tell it. And what that will do is it will carry greater retention for the reader. And so those two reasons are show and tell. They are not show, don't tell. Show and tell. This is correct for even movies, okay? Forrest Wells actually goes into another one, right? Kill your darlings. He goes into another one, don't do X in insert scene. Like for instance, don't do this in sex scenes or don't do this in action scenes. There is nothing don't do, because I promise you, whatever it is you say do not do, I will find you a writer who does it successfully. I will find you a writer who has sold millions of copies and does that exact thing. Leave down in the comments, don't do something, okay? I will find you, I promise you. Anyone in the world can challenge me on this one. 100%, I will always find you a writer who has found success on this particular concept. It's not a joke. There is no such thing as don't do this, okay? There is a suggestion, okay? Oftentimes when you hear don't do, it comes from just people who are delusional, who think that they have figured out writing. You haven't figured out, my homie. You haven't figured out. If you have really figured things out, we would be putting you on a freaking statue atop Mount Olympus, okay? You would be a god. No one knows what they're doing. Everyone is scrambling. And so you have to make sure when you give writing advice, you don't treat it as a rule, because this, I want to jump from this, leads to another problem, right? Which is snobbery. If you behave as if a writing rule is, the word of God, and it is the only way to write, what ends up happening is that writers oftentimes will be, disconnecting each other. You be like, hey, you're not worth it. You have adverbs. Like some people will not read a book because the book has adverbs. What kind of absolutely stupendous behavior is that? They are often not going to read that book because it has adverbs, because others have said adverbs are bad. It's not because, they suddenly woke up one morning and they were like, oh, guess what? Adverbs are terrible. No, actually people have influenced them with this particular thinking, right? When I was younger, I used to read a ton of books that had adverbs and I used to enjoy the heck out of them. But nowadays there's this, conflict in me, and I'm like, why? Why is there this conflict? And after I acknowledge it, I'm like, I'm suddenly chill, I'm suddenly calm, and I realize it's a terrible writing advice that has been battled endlessly by agents and editors as well as other writers and reinforced socially. And so this concept is awful. It has to be thrown away. The concept that writing rules are rules. In fact, Forrest Wells gives a beautiful gif. The code is more what you would, call guidelines rather than actual rules, right? And hey, talking about snobbery, right? Snobbery really gets to me. Last video I talked about one of my favorite, if not flat out my favorite fantasy author, N.K. Jemisin, right? And how her books, fantasy books, seem to be always, just the perfect literary pieces of art. But literary snobs like to really, put down the fantasy genre, right? And they try to behave as if it's not, serious literature. But I want to talk to you, someone who actually gets this particular point across very, very beautifully, right? And it's from Anora Reid. She says, and I hope that's the she, there is no such thing as literary or genre fiction. It's an arbitrary marketing label. This is beautiful. It has to be said. It has to really be said. It absolutely has to be said. And there's entire group of people, right, mostly in academia, who have hinged and have, built the entire identity around being superior to fantasy and being superior to some genres because they are literary, right? And this is very important because it means these people are sectioning each other. They are choosing tribes based on a marketing label. Literary is a marketing label. We can tell this shit because Shakespeare is considered one of the most literary of literary authors, and he has a ton of fantasy in his books. Anora gives another example, right? She says one example is Geek Love by Catherine Dunn. Sorry, I haven't read this, but if you have read it and you know, I don't know. I'm not yeah, but I gave my own example, right? I can give you plenty of other examples. 100 Years of Solitude. And so there are so many books that are considered literary that have fantasy elements in them, that have magical stuff in them, voodoo that doesn't make sense outside of the fantasy genre, right? And these shaggy, tired old bastards will behave as if that is not fantasy, and that this fantasy we have agreed that is superior to another fantasy, blah blah blah. You get the point, right? That is a lot of BS, and I really hate that, and I want to get this across, and I really appreciate that Honora has put it beautifully, especially I haven't read, Geek Love. I haven't read it. It's called Literary, but has Paranormal Psychic plot points. She elaborates. She has a beautiful Twitter account, and she is extremely energetic. In fact, I could not skip on all of her replies to other people in the comment. I would love to include those, but for time's sake, you get the point. We'll be moving on. And we will not just be moving on. We'll be moving on to an adjacent point. Jupiter Manfis, actually, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. I am terrible at names, like, I'm sorry, everyone. But she says, you don't need to plan your novel right away. Go on with the flow and your gut can work as well. And this is another thing that relates to writers sectioning themselves into tribes, right? Because when you section yourself into a tribe based on an arbitrary stuff, oftentimes logic gets thrown out of the way. I remember a few weeks ago, I was in a writing forum, and I don't particularly remember where. I am in these writing forums a lot, I'm sorry, okay? But basically what ends up happening is that, I come across someone who advocates for drafting your story before you write. And, they say, I have tried, discovery writing, okay, being a gardener, right, as George R. R. Martin says, or a banster, as is known more popularly. But basically, they say, I have tried, discovery writing. It doesn't work, guys. It's a falsehood. What works is this. It is this. And basically, you have to draft your story before you write it. And, I remember someone else also pointing out that that particular person is just wrong. And generally speaking, what this is writers sectioning themselves into tribes, irrespective of logic, okay? Never throw logic out of the window, because logic is extremely important here. And so what you have to understand in this particular case is that there are other ways of writing. There's no single way of writing, as First Well said. There is all of these genres that we have, sectioned ourselves into. I am this writer, because you are that writer. No, don't do that. And there is no right way to plan out a novel. For instance, I wrote a draft for the current story I'm working on, right? Because right now I'm starting to work on a story, but I wrote the first few chapters, right? First 3 chapters already. Actually, those 3 chapters are 50% different from what I have already planned. Once you draft your story, you can go with the flow. There is no need to religiously worship your draft, right? There's no need to religiously worship your draft, number one. Number two, there is no need to attack others and to claim stuff. That this is the way, this is how we will do it, and if anyone who doesn't do it, they are a blasphemer, we have to hang them. Don't do that, don't be an asshole, and so that is very, very important. I really want to express this a lot. And another one that I really love from Alexander, one of my good friends from Twitter. So basically he says, my unpopular opinion is that as soon as you feel ready to query or self-publish your book, that's the moment you shouldn't. Instead, that is when you should take a few weeks off and do 1 or 2 more rounds of edits. Even though you may think it's perfect, there is often smaller details that get missed. And this is very important because this comes from life experience. I myself have really experienced this one before, where, I think so far in my life, I've had 2 rounds of, flood of rejections. So there are 2 times I sought publication. Both times I received a flood of rejections. And the way it happened each time could have been fixed by Alexander's advice. If I were smart like Alexander and figured it out, I would have actually gone on and maybe had a better chance, right? Not necessarily done it, but definitely had a better chance of getting representation, right? And this is a very important writing advice. I wanted to include it here because it's very important and it resonated with me. The moment I read that, it resonated with me because everything is on a flux, okay? Whether will I include this, will I not include this? Everything is, up in the air. But this one, the moment I saw it, it's as if it was like a rock falling down and boom, it just had a solid ground immediately. And I love this particular advice and I wanted to include it before we jump to the final one. And this tweet is actually from Jack Shannon himself, the great legend. Back in the day, he used to, I think he showed up like several times in my videos. I really appreciate this guy, very clever. He says, what we need to do if we want more diversity in our fantasy setting is, first one, be more adventurous as readers, take punts on diverse settings. And so basically he continues from there and he gives number of details, right? And so I want to jump from there and talk about a mistake I made recently with a video, the fantasy genre has a diversity problem. And in that video, I talked about one argument for diversity, right, within the fantasy genre. Keep in mind, this whole thing relates back to the fantasy genre. And I gave my perspective alone. And there is one video talking about my perspective and one argument out of a plethora of perspectives, and I was blown away by the different opinions other people had of the topic. And so this mistake I made was basically make a focused video and focused on one argument for diversity, and I did not expand on other arguments for diversity, as well as some issues with diversity. And I hope in the future to discuss more with Jack Shannon, as well as other writers in the writing community and readers as well who read fantasy books, and to talk more about the subject and to delve into more details, because I don't really want to make that mistake ever again, the mistake of just having one perspective. And so I want to do something for the channel, which is change the branding of the channel such that it is a conversation back and forth. I don't want this to be just me just screaming into the void and just talking to myself and sharing only my perspective. I want you to chime in. I want you to give your perspective, and Jack Shannon has done this such that I actually felt extremely bad about that video I made, because I'm like, dude, I haven't included any of these. I haven't looked at the topic this way, and I haven't looked at the topic this other way. And so I want you, when you come to my channel, interact with the content and share your opinion and feel encouraged. And I will change the branding such that, this fact is reflected more. And so Jack Shannon, to complete his particular, quote, he gives another one, right? So first one is that, we readers have to be more adventurous when we read fantasy. And so number two is encourage and welcome authors from a wider range of backgrounds. And this one is very, very awesome. And I really agree with it. If we want more diversity in the fantasy genre, we need to be open to authors, or people who come from different cultures, right? Because oftentimes it can be very difficult to penetrate into an entirely different market that, the majority of the people speak a different language. The majority of the people are not you. Believe me, I would know a lot about that. And so it is important that we can, encourage people to share the different perspectives, right? And that I think is awesome, and that I think is important. He goes on into a lot more detail. I will in fact leave a link to his tweet and also to his Twitter account. You can follow him, you can listen to him, you can talk to him about writing. I think he's an awesome fella, Jack Shannon. Tell me what you think of the topics we have discussed in this particular video. I had fun talking to all of you over in Twitter. If you have anything to share, especially the topics that we covered in this video, share in the comments. Have a nice day. God bless you.